What's going on, GBA fans? My name is Monotooi, and I am here with the Confusion, and today we are bringing you guys the GBA Season 10 team overview. So we're going to be looking at each team, their coaches, their assistant coaches, their production teams, and each of the Pokemon that they've drafted to be on their own team. To start off, we're going to get right into it. We have the Copenhagen Sawsbucks, head coach being Frosted, with the assistant coach being Vepsis. Their team consists of Iron Bundle, Landorus Therian, Hydreigon, Hisuian Zoroark, Hisuian Lilligant, Slowbro, Talonflame, Quillfish Hisuian, Diancie, Magnezone, and Hisuian Avalugg. So, right off the bat, bonus points for picking a bunch of Hisuian Mons. Big fan of that. Also a huge fan of the Iron Bundle, which she was able to pick up for 125 bid capital. Iron Bundle was banned from OU for being incredibly strong. Delibird had a phenomenal glow-up, going from being practically never used on any team, even at the lowest tiers, to being far too good for OU. And for good reason. It's extremely fast, it has an incredibly strong freeze dry, has a great offensive typing with a solid enough defensive typing, making sure it's not weak to really that much priority, and it's not the easiest to revenge kill. And again, that freeze dry is just so strong. Her Terra Captains are Hydreigon and Hisuian Avalugg. Big fan of Terra Captain Hydreigon. Being able to potentially counter fairies that would try and wall it is enormous. That was always kind of Hydreigon's biggest weakness, is even though it gets access to Flash Cannon, it would never really be strong enough to break through a lot of defensive fairies. Now it's going to be more than capable. Even if you don't go the Steel route, you can still always have the ability to just get bonus stab on your Dragon or Dark attacks, both of which can be spammable depending on the team. I also love the fact that she has access to multiple hazards, such as Spikes, T-Spikes, and Stealth Rock, potential Steel Trapper with Magnezone, just a very well-rounded team that can also get some very good offensive momentum. But that's enough of the Copenhagen Sawsbucks. Next, we have the Chicago Dragapults, coached by QtheCostaRican and Shayquaza.
Yeah, sorry, I was getting excited there. The Chicago Dragapults have a really interesting team. I think the first thing you got to give them credit for, right, is they drafted their mascot. I think that's really cool. Dragapult itself is known to be a really strong draft Pokemon in this generation. It stands to be that way this time around too. I mean, access to that speed tier while also giving you incredible stab with Ghost, with Dragon. You don't have to worry about pursuit trapping. It's really strong. And then you round out that team with Pokemon like Iron Moth, Ursaring, Serena, Iron Hand, Scizor, Enamorous Therian, Hippowdon, water form of Paldean Tauros, Mesprit, and Rotom Frost. There is so much going on there. You've got some good Volturn core and things like Rotom Frost and Serena, which make it difficult for normal ground-type Pokemon and other Pokemon that normally get in the way of Volturn to prevent that. Rotom Frost is definitely one of those lower-tier Pokemon that seem to put in work for what it normally costs, and that's just an incredible addition to what's already a strong team. Ursaring in this kind of tier in which you can run a Violite, as well as the sets it normally runs, is also a really cool addition to the team. Enamorous Therian, right, being added as part of the brand new set of Pokemon that came with Legends Arceus is really cool. It's really bulky. And now, while it is slow, he's got the slow Pokemon like Hippowdon and Enamorous and Iron Hands. You can't count out Pokemon like the Dragapult and the Iron Moth and the Paldean Tauros to help with some of those speed tiers. The Terra Captain here is going to be that Iron Moth, being both fire and grass. I think fire is really strong, probably the better of it. It's 2 stabs, and then giving it grass, the ability to kind of wreck some of those ground types that see that 4 times weakness is really attractive, is really a perfect secondary typing. So overall, I think a super strong team, right? He's got hazard removal, he's got priority, and yeah, so overall, I think this is going to be one of the stronger teams that, you're going to have to keep an eye out for. But up next, we've got the New York Empoleon, if you want to take that, Mono.
Of course, the New York Empoleon are coached by Goldoa, with Addison, or Aquarius being his assistant coach. And looking at this team, there's a common theme with a lot of these teams where they have a lot of offensive momentum. I feel like bulk this generation is a little bit less prioritized just because of things like terrestrialization, where you're allowed to kind of use different moves on Pokemon that will be able to break through what would normally wall them in previous generations. Starting off, They have Greninja, which they were able to get for the minimum of 25, which is phenomenal. They did nerf Protein a bit this generation. It no longer allows you to, if you switch up moves, it will not change the type after the first move. You know, if you click Hydro Pump once, you're a water type until you switch out. Even if you click like Ice Beam or U-Turn afterwards. Regardless, very, very strong team. Greninja, Garchomp, Mew, Zapdos, Ceruledge, Fortress, Hisuian Decidueye, Lilligant, Florges, Overqwil, and Zangoose. So, right off the bat, I'm noticing some very strong offensive Pokemon right at the top. Greninja, Garchomp. Then you have 2 Pokemon that can be very defensive or offensive depending on what you want, Mew or Zapdos. They did nerf Mew quite a bit this generation without some reliable recovery, without things like knockoff, but it can still serve its purpose. Ceruledge, very, very interesting Pokemon. Love seeing it. Relatively flexible, can do various different things. Also has some hazards with Fortress. Has some setup potential with things like, you know, Calm Mind, Florges, possibly, you know, Swords Dance, Garchomp. A big fan overall of just how many of the mons on this team can either be offensive or defensive. It's very versatile. You know, Garchomp can be offensive, defensive. Like I said, Mew, Zapdos. Even Fortress has some offensive potential. It's not just a Hazard Stack and Spinner. Even Florges too. If you want to run offensive Florges, have fun, you know. But with that being said, we are now going to move on to the Atlanta Victinis, of course, coached by JayVee and Gravy.
Yeah, the Atlanta Victinis also have a really, really strong team. Looking at what they have Pokemon like Tornadus Therian, Urshifu Rapid Strike form, the water one, Komala, Dragalge, Zarude, Skeledirge, and Corviknight. I think that's one of the strongest defensive cores you can have in this generation. You've got Sandy Shocks, Gardevoir, Abomasnow, and Glimmet. And I want to touch on a few of those Pokemon. The first one being Gardevoir, right? Gardevoir is one of those Pokemon that seems to excel so much in Draft League. I don't know what it is. I think the combination of Trace as an ability, while also having an incredible dual typing in Fairy and Psychic, throwing a Choice Scarf on that thing and letting it click Moonblast sometimes just steals games during the late game. I think it's incredible. You can also run its setup with things like Calm Mind. So overall, I think that's one of the stronger Pokemon you can get for a cheaper price. And then there's also some of those cheaper Pokemon like Abomasnow and Glimmet that maybe in the past you would overlook, but now that Abomasnow gets that 50% buff to its defense in the snow, it's a lot more viable. It can take a couple hits it normally couldn't. Things like Brave Birds from some strong Pokemon, it can now take an Aurora Veil, access to Ice Shard, Blizzard, and Grass type moves. Really good. Glimmet, I mean, it's cheap and you're not going to bring it to most games, but just knowing that that's on the team sheet, you got to prepare for Toxic Debris and Spikes and Stealth Rock. It's an option, right? And without taking that into consideration, normally you can kind of be in a difficult situation. Looking at some of those stronger picks though, Tornadus Therian, while it did get nerfed a little bit with losing things like Knockoff, still overall really strong. Bleakwind Storm being much more accurate. Well, I won't say much more accurate, but more accurate than Hurricane is. And then throw Urshifu Rapid Strike and Dragalge and Sandy Shocks, and opponents' defenses are going to be in a tough spot. The last thing I'll mention is Skeledirge and Corviknight, which I hinted to earlier, being a really strong defensive core. Skeledirge actually being one of those Pokemon that can Terra. So they have 2 Pokemon that can Terra, the Skeledirge and the Dragalge, choosing to get some more lower tier Pokemon to Terra. And I think it's really smart because Dragalge, being both Dragon and Water in its Terra forms, allows it to take advantage of adaptability on its Dragon type moves, but also its Water type moves, right? Skrelp is a Water type Pokemon, so Dragalge has access to things like Hydro Pump, and adaptability, Terra, Water, Hydro Pumps are going to hurt. Combine that with Skeledirge being either pure Fire as a Terra type or Fairy, allows it to soak a lot of hits being an unaware Pokemon, especially as a Fairy type. Steel and Poison are just not common enough to kind of scare away a Fairy-type Skeledirge. So I think overall a really strong pick. The team has hazard removal, it's got speed, it's got screens and things like Sandy Shock, so it has a lot of versatility, and I am very, very excited to see how they use this team. Yeah, so let's go ahead and move on to the Maryland Torterrapins.
Alright, so the Maryland Torterrapins are coached by Under the Radar with the assistant coach of Galadite74. This is on paper, one of the scariest offensive-looking teams. As you can see, they have Baxcalibur, Ursaluna, both of which are offensive monsters, Grimmsnarl, Slowking, Quaquaval, Cyclozar, Hisuian Electrode, Colossal, Orthworm, Salazzle, and Ice-Q. So right off the bat, you can see they have a lot of various different offensive threats. By the way, I apologize if you hear birds in the background. They are really excited for the GBA Season 10, as the rest of you should be. But, anyways, Baxcalibur can set up, do a lot of damage. Grimmsnarl has some potential setup opportunities. You know, a lot of these different mons, things like Cyclozar, can shift gear. If you want to get crazy, Colossal can Rock Polish, Salazzle can Nasty Plot. A lot of different things that can do damage right off the bat and also set up and potentially sweep opponents' teams. Ursaluna is one of the strongest wall breakers in the game. Normal ground gives it a really good switch into electric types, and if you predict wrong and go for a Volt Switch as Ursaluna comes in, there's a very good chance that you're just going to end up losing a Pokemon. Terra Captains being Quaquaval and Electrode. Things like Ursaluna don't really need access to the Terra, so he opted to go for the Quaquaval and Hisuian Electrode, giving him some more options. Hisuian Electrode's move pool also isn't the best, so having access to a Terra Blast of whatever type they choose can become very, very valuable. Also love the fact that things like Colossal, Orthworm, and I believe even Ursaluna, Cyclozar all have access to various different hazards, and obviously Colossal can also spin. Just a very solid team overall. I really love the addition of Slowking as well to give them some initiative into those wall breakers like Baxcalibur and Ursaluna. Also, something important to note, while Orthworm and Cyclozar do learn Shed Tail is currently banned in the GBA, so they will, that's why they're a little bit lower tiered, and they still have value outside of that as well. So, with that out of the way, we are now going to be moving on to the Bullet Punch Club, coached by TheUzigunner and MattyBrollic.
Yeah, and Uzi and Matty have a fun team here, led by Pokemon like Dragonite and Goldango, while they also have access to Pokemon like Galarian Zapdos, Meowscarada, Azumarill, Clodsire, Uxie Avalugg, Pyroar, Braviary Hisuian form, and the Dusk form of Lycanroc. Now, this team is a ton of fun because you have access to Dragonite. Dragonite being the sole Terra captain on this team, having access to Flying as one of its Terra typing, and I'm sure everyone can guess Normal being the other Terra type. I mean, Extreme Speed Stab on Dragonite is something so many Pokemon fans have been like dreaming of for so many years, and now we have access to it. So that's going to be really tough for opponents to prep for. But in addition, things like Goldango to stop defogs while also being itself really strong. You also have good defensive things. Pokemon like Clodsire to be unaware, Avalugg to take things on the physical side, Uxie, they're all great. And then Pokemon like Meowscarada, who I think in draft has been one of the most prominent Pokemon in Gen 9. And then also access to some new Pokemon that I don't think a lot of people have seen used in draft. Pokemon like Hisuian Braviary. I'm excited to see what the Bullet Punch Club does with a Pokemon like Hisuian Braviary. But overall, the speed tiers look great. The hazard removal in Avalugg is a little bit on the weaker side, but I think we've seen a lot of great teams so far not rely on hazard on hazard removal so much. It doesn't seem to be as prominent thanks to things like heavy duty boots. So overall, a really strong team. Very excited to see how they use some of those underutilized Pokemon or just some of those Pokemon that haven't had a chance to really stand out so far in the draft metagame. But up next, I believe we have the Wolverhampton Weaviles.
We do. I also want to point out with the Bullet Punch Club, getting a minimum value Dragonite, which was bidded on for the minimum 25 bid capital, is absolutely criminal. That is one of the strongest Pokemon that we were considering banning Terra on, and it went for basically nothing. So
insane.
Yeah, this team ended up being incredibly strong. Anyways, to move on to the Wolverhampton Weaviles, who are coached by just a Weavile, of course, and Scorpion. We have Great Tusk, Walking Wake, Screamtail, Gengar, Iron Leaves, Rotom Heat, Bisharp, Frostmoth, Galarian Moltres, Braviary, and Samurott. So right off the bat, Great Tusk is one of the better defensive mons. That can also be offensive, but it is in OU, it's almost like Lando T this generation. Like, you see it on almost every team just because it's the only thing that can consistently switch into, like, half the tier. And I feel like it's going to be able to do very similarly in Draft League. It also has the option of being offensive. It's very, very strong, has solid enough move coverage, can set up hazards, can remove things. Walking Wake, they don't have Sun support to set it up, but Walking Wake, regardless, is very, very strong. Got it at relatively cheap at 75 bid capital. Maybe they can run like a Sunny Day on something like, I don't know, Screamtail, Rotom Heat, something just to set it up. If not, it's still very strong on its own. Screamtail is this generation's annoying fairy. It just comes in, and it's very difficult to deal with. It's extremely fast. It can Encore lock you into things. It has access to fire coverage, which can damage steel types that want to come in on it. Gengar is a phenomenal, fast potential wall breaker, sometimes setup sweeper. It's just very, very strong overall. Same with Iron Leaves. Bisharp now has access to a Violate. I've always felt that Bisharp is one of the more underrated Pokemon in the game just because it's slow and has a 4 times weakness. A lot of people don't want to deal with it, but it has a very strong Sucker Punch. It can set up, and now with access to a Violate, it has increased defenses that will allow it to take hits that it previously couldn't. And even, I'm a big fan of his lower tiers as well. You know, Galarian Moltres, Braviary, even things like Samurott and Frostmoth. You may not see those things come too often, but those are lower tiers that opponents will still have to prep for because they always have that either setup threat or maybe wall breaking threat looming over them. So that was the Wolverhampton Weaviles. Next up we have Playmore Esports, of course, an organization run by John, aka Pokemon, with coaches GeneralTarheel and John Jr. underneath.
Yeah, this is also a really fun team. And, you know, you were mentioning Sun earlier. This is going to be that Sun team, right? They've got the Torkoal. They got it for nice and cheap. And they built a team that I think is a little bit unorthodox when it comes to Sun teams. But I think that's actually a benefit for them because a lot of Sun teams you're going to see, right, the Walking Wake and a lot of other Pokemon that are more traditional, right, your Chlorophyll grass type. This team has neither. It takes advantage of Pokemon like Roaring Moon and Slitherwing to boost access, you know, to their one stat, either by 30% or 50% if it's their speed. Dash Bun is a great Pokemon to absorb some of those fire hits that might come back to it thanks to its well-baked body. Appleton, also a low-tier pick, but thanks to Thick Fat, gives them another way to soak some of those fire hits that their opponents might try to take advantage of when the sun is up. In addition to that, they have some strong offensive picks like Heatran, also taking advantage of the sun, but also a Pokemon like Hisuian Samurott, who by clicking its signature attack gets up spikes, boosted by its ability Sharpness, is going to be really difficult for a lot of opponents to deal with so long as that move hits. But even if it doesn't, they have Glimmora, who can set up spikes on its own, Toxic Debris, right? We were just talking about Glimmet, Glimmora being the evolution to that Pokemon, a lot more viable. In the back, they have Pokemon like Sandaconda to kind of discourage some of the Volt switching that might happen, but they also have Kilowattrel, another option to dissuade Volt Switch thanks to its ability, Volt Absorb. In addition, Pokemon like Mismagius to prevent Rapid Spin, and overall, I think just a really well-designed team. The speed tiers are also, you know, they're very well separated, so there's not going to be taking advantage of some of those speed tiers from their opponents. Pokemon like Kilowattrel and Mismagius are faster, and Pokemon like Slitherwing and Roaring Moon can become faster. The last thing I'll mention is their Terra Captain being Roaring Moon, I think is really strong. Dark type being the Stab Terra type that they went with, and then Fire, no doubt that was to work with their Sun, was their secondary Terra typing. So overall, I think a really strong team. I'm excited to see how a Sun team like this does. But next up, we have the Edmonton Coilers.
Yep, so just as a final note on Playmore Esports, I love the fact that they also drafted Sun and then drafted at least, what, like 2 things that are immune to fire with Dash Bun and Heatran. Love it. Mm-hmm. Alright, so to move on to the Edmonton Coilers, coached by D.Rey and OGalbina as the assistant coach. We have Iron Valiant, Galarian Slowking, Thundurus Incarnate, Tyranitar, Hisuian Goodra, Donphan, Rotom, I don't know how to pronounce this. Farigiraffe, I think. I screw it up every time. Hope that's right. Alamomola, Tauros with the Fire variant, Paldean, and Carbink. So, Slightly more top-heavy than some of the other drafts, but the top part of this draft is absolutely disgusting. Iron Valiant, Galarian Slowking, Thundee-Eye, Tyranitar. That's just a terrifying top 4. Hisuian Goodra, I think, is going to be kind of a sleeper pick during this draft. I think it's going to be very strong once they start to bring it, and once they start cooking up some nice sets for it. And then beyond that, you also have just a lot of what you would want in a team like this. So you have potential setup sweepers, Iron Valiant, Thundee, Tyranitar, things like that, even Rotom-Mow. You also have access to Wish Pass with Alomomola, being able to heal some of your offensive threats on the team, and a lot of these offensive threats are not frail. You know, like Iron Valiant is not particularly frail, Thunderous Eye has usable defensive stats, Tyranitar is extremely bulky, so you'll be able to send a lot of these Pokemon in, even if it's a super effective hit, potentially have them live a hit and then heal back up to full with the Wish. Iron Valiant is one of the strongest offensive Pokemon in the game. It just hits incredibly hard. Its ability is phenomenal. The coverage it gets is perfectly fine. It's just a fast, powerful fairy type, of which there are so few in the game. And outside of that, this is just a very good overall draft. It has a lot of, like I said, the Wish Pass type into bulky offensive threats. It has just a lot of bulky offense, and I'm a big fan of bulky offense. We'll say its hazard setup may not be the absolute best, but it has rocks and has plenty of other ways to get some chip damage off. So that's going to be the Edmonton Coilers.
Yeah, and next up we've got the Borussia Donphan, led by Lars and Frank. I think this is also one of those teams I'm excited to see in action, because you've seen a lot of these Pokemon kind of play in maybe standard. Pokemon like Iron Treads, that does really well. Palmot, that does really well thanks to Revival Blessing, though not going to be used in this league. Cresselia, which has done very well in the past. I'm excited to also see how it does now. It did get a little bit of a nerf with its defenses, but overall, still a really strong psychic type that's going to sponge a lot of really big hits. So to go over the rest of the team, they have Enamorus Incarnate, Brambleghast, Volcanion, Weavile, like I mentioned, the Palma and Cresselia, Salamence, Venomoth, Tornadus Incarnate, and Cloth. I'm really excited to see both Tornadus Incarnate and Enamorus Incarnate on one team. I think that's really fun. But let's talk a little bit more about what those Pokemon are going to do. Enamorus Incarnate, a really, really strong Pokemon. I mean, you just put Moonblast on that thing and go to town. But in addition, it has access to Contrary Superpower with 115 base attack. So you can't count out Superpower and Moonblast on the same sets. So that's exciting to see. Iron Treads, I think, is one of the best rapid spinners in the game. If you're going to get one in draft, I think Iron Treads is probably one of those top tier spinners. But they also have Brambleghast, so they don't have to rely on Iron Treads being a defensive spinner every single game. I think that was a really smart move. Their Terra Captains are Salamence and Volcanion. Salamence, being Flying and Steel, makes a ton of sense. Moxie, right? That thing is going to do some incredible work. Volcanion's Terra type is Water and Grass. The one critique I would give is I feel like maybe making that Fire instead of Water to take advantage of the Water Absorb on Volcanion may have been a little bit better, but I am sure they have their reasons. Steam Eruption off of Terra Water is still going to be incredibly hard to switch into, and being Terra Grass to deal with opposing water types is probably the primary concern Volcanion has going into every match. So again, an incredible choice. Overall, things like Venomoth and Cloth, those are some lower tier Pokemon that if they come and you're not prepared for, can put in a ton of work. Palmot is going to be a great electric absorbing Pokemon. That way Iron Treads isn't the reliant Volt switch-in. And then Weavile, though nerfed again in this generation and the previous one, still a strong pick, fast, hits hard, and overall, I think really exciting to see how they pull a team like this together, because they have some really strong options. But going into the next team, we've got the San Francisco Arcaniners, led by SceptileMC and Haydunn.
Alright, so right off the bat, we have Chi-Yu, Volcarona, Gyarados, Garganacl, Amoonguss, Hawlucha, Regieleki with Terra Band on it. It's an important distinction. Regular Rotom, Rillaboom, and Tinkaton. This is the only draft that did not go all the way. They opted to leave their last slot open. So they have one less Pokemon than everyone else, but their team is extremely strong. They drafted Chi-Yu immediately, spent up a lot of bidding capital. They probably didn't think they were going to be able to bid on too much else, until somebody threw up Volcarona and they went for a Hail Mary 50, and for whatever reason, no one else decided that Volcarona was worth more than that. So they have two monstrous fire types at the top, both of which extremely powerful. Chi-Yu we discussed being potentially banned, because with Terra it's absolutely disgusting. Same with Volcarona. As you can see, Volcarona is its Terra captain. Just an absolute monster. This thing went from borderline UU, OU, BL tier to banned out of OU, just because of Terra. Makes it incredibly hard to deal with. Gyarados, also a very powerful setup sweeper. Garganacl, one of the most annoying Pokemon to go against. Similarly, Garganacl, Amoonguss, very nice bulky core right there. You also have Hawlucha with access to grassy terrain and Rillaboom, so you can potentially go for Hawlucha sweeps against certain teams. Regieleki, while much weaker since it does not have access to Terra, it still is an extremely fast electric type that has access to Rapid Spin in order to remove hazards. One thing I do want to note is that with those first three heavy-hitting Pokemon, Chi-Yu, Volcarona, and Gyarados at the top being weak to rocks, their hazard removal isn't the best, but with heavy-duty boots, as you had mentioned earlier, there isn't usually a need to bring hazard removal every single week like you may have wanted to in previous generations. So overall, extremely strong team. Wouldn't be surprised if this team had, two or three things in the top kill leaderboards at the end of the season.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think this is going to be a team to watch out for. A lot of people looking at those double fire types and sort of scoffing. They have the same base speed and the same base special attack, but planning for one of those Pokemon is a nightmare enough. Planning for both, I think, is going to be really tricky, because you'll have one Pokemon maybe on your team that can take, a Beads of Ruin Fire Blast, but once that Pokemon gets whittled down, now where's your Quiver Dance Volcarona answer? So don't sleep on this team. I'm excited to see how those games turn out. But going into our very last team of the league, we've got the San Diego Snugglers, led by D.Rey and Kurpie. This team, I think, personally, is the scariest one on paper. I mean, the fact that we gave them and allowed them to draft Palafin and Annihilape together back-to-back is incredible. Now, to be fair, they spent nearly their entire budget on these two Pokemon, leaving the remaining three auctioned Pokemon to only be a base 25 auction amount. So they basically had to wait a little bit until some of the money cleared off the floor and they were able to, pick up their last three Pokemon. And you might think that they're not going to be good, but their last three Pokemon are Arcanine, Iron Jugulis, and Gothitelle. Those are incredible Pokemon in Draft League. Arcanine, just a strong, bulky fire type, especially when you have a Pokemon like Palafin, which is scared of grass types. To have Arcanine to back it up is incredible. Iron Jugulis, while not as great as its counterpart, is still really strong. You still have to watch out for the Dark Pulse and the Air Slash and work around it. Gothitelle, of course, you have to plan. You can, pack a Shed Tail, but at the end of the day, Gothitelle itself, being able to trap Pokemon, even something like a Calm Mind or a Scarf Set to get rid of some of the Pokemon that Annihilape and Palafin struggle with, is incredibly strong. Now, they do have some lower end picks that maybe aren't as traditionally good. You've got Muck, you've got Persian, Alolan form. Klefki, I think, is still really strong with Screens and T-Wave. Toedscruel is a good mid-tier spinner. Its ability does make it a little bit hard to use, but overall, still really strong. And last but not least, you have the Rotom Wash, which, again, is a great Pokemon in Draft League. Overall, a really strong team, a really scary team. Annihilape being able to be the one Terra captain, Ghost and Fairy. We've seen a couple of teams use Fairy as their secondary typing, and it's for good reason. Having a Pokemon use its ordinary stab while being able to also keep the defensive benefits of being a Fairy type is going to be great for Annihilape. So this is a team to watch out for, because I'm scared to see Palafin and Annihilape kind of come out there together and join the leaderboards. I hope they do, because they are some incredible Pokemon to see on one team. But overall, that's, I think, the cool thing about how the GBA has run things this season. The combination of auctioning and normal snake draft format is going to keep things very exciting here. So if you guys are excited, definitely, follow up with these videos, because they are going to be a ton of fun. But I would say my overall thoughts on some of these teams is you've got some incredibly hard-hitting teams. You've got some teams that put some really strong defenses together that I'm excited to see. I think the Corviknight Skeledirge is my favorite one to kind of see come out of all this. But there's some incredible teams. Mono, what are your thoughts?
I think if the San Diego Snugglers lose any games this season, it's a failure on their part. This team has, I think, 3 Mons that are banned. Impalafin, Annihilate, but I know only Shadow Tag is banned, but for the sake of this conversation, I'll say Gothitelle is Uber as well. You have 3 Ubers, you have Rotom Wash, which has been an OU, I don't know how many generations, I'm not sure what tier it's in this year, but it's still phenomenal. Just an incredible team. Not that the other teams are particularly weaker, I just feel like this team is incredibly strong, and I'm really looking forward to see how people prep against it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think all these teams have some incredible top-tier hitters, and these battles are going to be fun to watch. I don't think we're going to really see a ton of battles that last, 60 minutes on the timer. I think all these teams have such incredibly hard, heavy hitters. They're well-built, they're well-supported. I'm excited to see the use of both a head coach and a supporting coach be kind of implemented in the GBA. And overall, I am excited to see some really fun battles in the coming weeks.
I am as well, and I hope that you all are as well. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Please let us know who you think has the strongest draft of GBA Season 10. Let me know what you guys think of your favorite team's draft. And that's it. Stay tuned for some weekly videos, some weekly repacks coming up, and we'll see you guys next time.